Welcome to the Cohen Veterans Bioscience webinar series. This is a monthly program sponsored by Cohen Veterans Bioscience for the brain research and systems biology community. Cohen Veterans Bioscience is a nonprofit research alliance whose mission is to transform research in veterans' mental health through translational research. We're focused on understanding the molecular underpinnings of diseases such as PTSD and TBI to develop better treatments and diagnostics. Before I introduce today's speaker, let me walk through a few logistics. This program is being recorded and will be archived in the Cohen Veterans Bioscience YouTube channel and website. The presentation will be approximately 45 minutes in length to allow for Q&A afterwards. So please use the Q&A feature on the website to pose a question, and we will pose the question to the presenter. Today, our speaker is Dr. Daniela Brunner, the founder and president of Early Signal Foundation. Dr. Brunner has worked on the analysis of developmental, psychiatric, and neurodegenerative disease models for the last 20 years. A major focus of her work has been establishing and automating rodent behavioral tests and novel high-throughput preclinical platforms using computer vision and machine learning algorithms to comb behavioral signatures for phenotyping, drug screening, and systems biology approaches. As Senior Vice President of Behavioral Research at Psychogenetics, she was in charge of large projects focused on back translation of anti-smoking, cessation medication, preclinical cognitive assessment, and studies in neurodegeneration, psychiatry, and autism. The current overarching goal of Daniela's work is to establish analytical systems that integrate behavioral and omics readouts for the discovery of novel therapeutics. She aims to develop new tools for the analysis of health signatures in humans, particularly for rare disorders, with a special interest in connecting genomic information with behavioral domains, especially those passively captured with wearable sensors. The digital health revolution is well underway, and with an exponential number of players entering and contributing to the emerging era of connected care, artificial intelligence can bridge this gap between a healthcare system-centric to patient-centric modality of care through user-friendly access to health records and intelligent tools that enable patient engagement, care plan adherence, and informed self-management of health. In today's webinar, Dr. Brunner will discuss the Early Signal platform, which enables innovative modes of healthcare delivery via the secure capture, management, analysis, and delivery of highly actionable healthcare information across the healthcare continuum. Through artificial intelligence approaches, the EaSi system utilizes data from wearable and home sensor technology to remotely monitor patient health status, including sleep architecture, gait, and stereotypes, and provides evidence-based clinical decision support and promotes positive outcomes for health and neurodevelopmental, neurodegenerative, and psychiatric disorders. Dr. Brunner will explore the potential of this device-agnostic analytical platform to provide surrogate measures to inform clinical decision-making, enable post-treatment feedback, promote positive outcomes, and optimize resource utilization for care management and delivery. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Brunner.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending the webinar. We will discuss healthcare and technology. So, what's wrong with the current U.S. healthcare model? What's wrong with it? Well, the reimbursement system nowadays is based not on value, but on procedure volume. That means there is no incentive to provide good, accurate, precise care and stop the patient from coming back. We believe that this is going to be changing in the next few years, and that technology is an important part of this digital revolution. The system nowadays emphasizes treatment over prevention. So this is another aspect that will be changing as we are able to monitor health continuously, passively, before disease is established. The patient right now is monitored sporadically and non-continuously. The existence now of sensors that can be used in the home and they can be worn, then will allow us to monitor health continuously and then bring about an important change. The patient is also eventually have tools to self-manage after with supervision of the doctors. And this will mean that the visits to the doctors will happen when they are needed and it will not happen when they're not needed. So this new model of care is a value-based reimbursement where connected providers share information and health data is integrated. The patient self-management will also help with the chronic conditions, also rare conditions and special needs. We are still quite far from this, but way on our way to a new model of care. Currently, the US has the world's highest healthcare cost. Compared, for example, in this graph with about a dozen developed countries, the percent of GDP for the US is almost double that of these other countries. In fact, it is the highest in the world, followed by the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, the Maldives, Micronesia, and then Sweden and Switzerland. So you could think that we are in a great place, that actually healthcare is fantastic. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We have the highest cost for surgery, we have the highest cost for diagnostic imaging, the highest cost for pharmaceuticals. On top, we have the highest pay for physicians. So where's the money go? What is the return for all that money? It's shocking, but the US has a very low level of access to care, has a very low number of practicing physicians per capita, very low visits per capita, very low number of acute care hospital beds, very low responsivity when calling a doctor with a question, and also low availability of after-hour care. On top, we have the lowest life expectancy at birth compared to those countries I showed in the first slide, the worst infant mortality care, the highest percent of population older than 65 years with multiple chronic conditions, the highest obesity care rate, and the lowest survival expectancy for diabetic patients. This is truly shocking. An important part is that with all the technology we have, there's very low technology use in care management. The highest percentage of medical and medication lab errors occur in this country. There is very low percent of adoption and utilization of electronic health records. 30% of adults experience duplicative or unnecessary procedures. And the worst record of test results availability in due time. This is clearly an issue of information management being lagging behind. So there's a compelling need for technology to be used to improve healthcare in a number of areas. In fact, the majority of Americans agree with this view and support more access to better coordinated and well-informed care. So where is technology being used nowadays? Only 1/3 of the health centers surveyed say that they were using apps, but simply to remind patients of screening and appointments. This is a great opportunity to intervene and change. In fact, in the last 2 decades, there has been a digital revolution that affects the way we interact with music, publishing, retail. In fact, I have to say, I'm ashamed. I ordered my letters online and I get it at my door the next day. Why is healthcare lagging behind? If I want to share the results from my last MRI with a new doctor, it takes me a form. I have to fill a form. I have to fax a form. I don't have a fax at home, so I have to drive the form to my old doctor to make sure that they can share the MRI with my new doctor. I'm sure everybody has experienced these type of problems, and there's really no reason. We know what the digital revolution means as we interact with music, publishing, and retail. However, the digital health revolution is also underway, luckily, and there's a number of players entering and contributing. Every day we hear of a new technology that is used for care. And where we want to go is to a personalized and a connected care. And technology can help us get there. And I hope that today I can show you how. So what is personalized care? Some companies like Amazon owe their success to an obsessive customer-centric philosophy, thinking always, what is the customer need? Each person, what do they need? How can we provide what each person requires? So the digital health revolution can achieve its potential by really focusing on a patient-centric view. So in this view, patients stop being consumers of cares, passive consumers of cares. They become informed, empowered, and active participants in their own health and well-being. And care is tailored and personalized to the patient. Eventually, we can move from a patient-centric to a person-centric as we move from treatment to prevention. So technology is a force for positive transformation. The new model of care, as I said, is based on value and not volume, on networks of connected providers, on integrated health data, on supervised self-management of chronic condition, and with tailored care for patients with rare condition and special needs. Now, to make all this happen, we need to acquire, integrate, and analyze data. So as you start collecting data, you get from individual data to a lot of data to big data. And we will rely on big data to find a lot of information. Big data at the population level and the group level can be used to capture subpopulation characteristics, to detect patterns of comorbidity, to assess risk factors, and other things like response to treatment. Some subpopulations may respond to treatment very differently. But also, big data can be used at the individual level to register personal idiosyncrasies, to increase the accuracy of individual diagnosis, to enable preventive medicine, and also to empower the individual. So individualized medicine is precise medicine. But as we collect data, we get to big data, we need to be able to comb these large sets of data. And this is where artificial intelligence comes in. But what is artificial intelligence? Does it mean that we put a computer in charge of our health and then doctors can go home and we don't need them anymore? Not at all. We require the artificial intelligence because with all the data we need to do some tasks that normally are done through human intelligence. We need to do these tasks through computers. They can go much faster and can repeat tasks in a very precise manner. Still, the tasks need to be defined by humans, by clinicians, by researchers, by caregivers, by the patients. We need humans to decide also what type of data needs to be gathered, to define the context in which data was gathered. We need to have humans think about how to process, how to integrate, model, and analyze such data, and also how to take clinical decisions based on such data. So how can artificial intelligence help us in a transition to patient-centric model? We need to extract information from big data to enhance care at the individual level. It can help provide user-friendly access to health records by improving information flow between network providers. It can sustain telehealth devices. It can provide intelligence tools to promote the patient engagement, care plan adherence, and inform self-management of chronic disease. So what do we need? What are the components for this new system? We have devices, we have apps, we have the cloud where we can move and store lots of data. We have artificial intelligence, and we have the domain expertise. So what do we need? Data. We need lots of data. We need passive and continuous health data so we can bridge the gap between doctors' visits. We need to see what's going on with the patient or the person while the person is not logged in. So we need access to non-aggregated or raw data for deep analysis. We need sensors, mobile and home sensor devices. We need the ability to capture and integrate multiple health domains, not just focus on one health domain, not just focus on your heart, but also on your diet and your pattern of activity and how you sleep and all the things that are affecting your heart. We need a robust artificial intelligence platform to ensure that we can integrate the data from different collaborators and providers, and also interoperability with the electronic health record system and billing systems. So, what is that we want to do at Early Signal? We want to develop a data analytic platform that utilizes wearable and home sensor technologies to remotely monitor patient health status. We need to support informed clinical decision-making and optimal resource utilization. We want to promote the patient engagement, adherence, and self-management. We want to engage the family members and caregivers. We want to open up existing data silos and complement the existing care workflow. And we want to help clinical organizations achieve value-based care, as discussed before. For example, in neurodevelopmental disorders, how can we apply technology? Here, there are no approved drug therapies. The FDA-approved clinical trial primary endpoints are non-specific, do not provide quantitative and objective parameters for evaluation and treatment. So focusing on Rett syndrome as a starting point, we're looking at how they sleep, how they breathe, and their movement disorder, in particular stereotypes. How can we use accelerometers and other sensors to establish hand stereotypy and gait abnormality signatures? If we can capture these typical stereotypic movements that characterize Rett syndrome, we can build an index that can be used then in a clinical trial and be FDA approved. In maternal health and mortality, we are also trying to use technology for telehealth. There's high mortality due to pregnancy-related complications in developing nations. In the US, also, maternal mortality is actually rising. A main contributor to mortality is a delay in access to qualified care. So what we want to do here is to build an early warning system where we can look at early signals of labor and early signals of complication, so intervention can be done faster. And this is something that we are developing, thinking of Africa, but also in areas of the United States where access to care is lagging behind. We're also working in cancer-free survival. Here, we want to enhance quality of life, and we think that sensors can really provide an ongoing assessment of health and give also an early warning about brain cancer recurrence. So here, if we can tell the patient who has gone through surgery that their baseline, post-surgical baseline, is not changing, then we can reassure them that life can continue and it could be good quality because there is no recurrence yet. An important part of what we do is focus on insomnia. Insomnia is, in a way, a low-hanging fruit for many disorders, in particular PTSD, TBI, and MDD. Insomnia is both a cause and a consequence of pathology. Insomnia triggers, prolongs, and increases disease acuity. So how can we manage insomnia and help patients get better? So one of the systems that we are setting together with our partners, the Cohen Veterans Bioscience and myHelios, it's a system called Circady, and it is actually alive, and you can go to circady.com. You see the link on the screen. This is a system where people with insomnia can log in and be treated. It uses a number of technological advances, including sensors for the home and wearable sensors. So Circady, as other applications of this technology, is based on this data flow that goes from the patient through the sensors, through the app, to the cloud that allows us communication and data analytics, to a dashboard where the clinicians can now interact with the patient. So we have the patient and we have a treatment team, and we do everything we can to increase communication between them. The sensors provide a lot of data while the clinician is not engaged with the patient, but through the app we can provide feedback, and we can provide then a channel of communication to the clinician. So let's talk about sensors for a minute. There is an invasion of the wearables. There are new devices every month. There are millions of wearables being sold per year, about 300 million devices being shipped this year. The ones that are increasing more rapidly are the smartwatches and the wristbands. So what's the perfect device? The perfect device doesn't exist, or those are almost perfect, actually very expensive. But hardware and software are rapidly evolving. So within a few years, these devices will become very important for health. So we are still moving away from fashion and comfort-oriented to diagnostic, therapeutic, and comfortable, high-quality wearable devices. We want to have wearable devices that provide good quality data. In artificial intelligence, people always say rubbish in, rubbish out. So what we want to put in is good quality. So fitness trackers, for example, are affordable, but data quality is limited. So this is something that's going to get better in the next few years as we get better sensors. Still, the sensors nowadays, combined with home sensors, can provide very good data. So what are necessary considerations for wearables and for sensors in general? It's going to take some time to convince patients to use them. We all encounter problems with our devices. It's hard to keep them running because the battery runs out. Sometimes it's difficult to start them. There is an app in the iPhone or Samsung that doesn't seem to work well. If we want to depend on this, we need to also consider how we extract and analyze the data and understand which decisions can safely be based on such data. And then it's going to be a while until these devices are integrated into the healthcare flow and until we convince clinicians that this is a good solution and that the data can complement their opinions. So these are a number of devices. At Early Signal, we are constantly assessing different devices for the home and for the persons. You can see here the output of an app is actually showing heart rate, breathing rate, and is making assessment of my stress. And you can guess, and this is actually a bed sensor, so you can guess I'm actually not hooked to this device, I'm not in bed. But also my heart rate is probably more like 110, not 62. We want to capture different domains using sensors. We want to go from emotional reactivity, sleep quality, circadian rhythms, motor activity, and luckily using these devices, we can capture most of these sensor domains. And again, we want to integrate the sensors domain into a health signature. Another part of the system is an app. There are thousands of apps coming to the market every month. Most of the apps, about 20%, they die within 6 years of release. That means they are completely removed. But also apps most of the time are downloaded once and never used again. There are a number of apps developed for health, and some are actually very successful. And you can see some of the icons on the right. The apps are different. Some are simply there to provide educational information or to remind us or to alert the users of some event. All the way, in these apps, the information goes in one direction. There are other apps which are more interesting. They provide guidance based on information entered by the user, or they enable communication with clinicians, family members, or caregivers. These are the apps that have an information flow that goes both ways. This is what we call a closed loop. We are closing the loop between the patient, the care, and back. These are the apps that we want to use for our solutions. So the app is it's a communicator, so the patient can tell the clinician how they feel, what time they went to bed, at what time they fell asleep. It's important to capture subjective data because in the end, we act based on our beliefs of what is going on with us. So in insomnia, for example, there's a big component of subjectivity. We want to hear what the patients say about them. We also want to see what the bed sensor says about their sleep pattern. But we also want to use this app to communicate back to the patient and give them reminders or to encourage them to do something or to remind them to change the battery of their sensors. So what do we do with all this data? So as I said before, we have data analytics, artificial intelligence. We need to monitor what's going on. We can check if the patient is complying with the treatment or with taking their meds. We can also do research. We can gain insights onto what's going on. And also we can assess alliance between the patient and the clinician. So what we need is a robust analytical platform. This is what we are about at Early Signal. In a universal intelligent system that can be tuned to disease signatures, they can handle unstructured continuous passive acquisition data, such as that coming from home and wearable devices. They can be applied to different applications. They can be integrated into hospital, clinical trials, and telehealth. They can be tuned to different domains, depending on what the question is being asked. that can be programmed to extract information day by day, and that can be act as a central hub for information processing. One important part is when we use the sensors is to understand the data and to validate the sensors. So here we can see very simple assessment of agreement on cardiovascular data using two devices, mFit, a bed sensor, and the Fitbit. And so we can see whether they agree or not. We can see also if there are abnormal values coming from one device, whether they are true or not. So we can correct one device using the other. In this graph, we have compared what these two devices say about sleep quality. So what we want to do is at the device level is to validate their sensors, to validate the data coming from the sensors and coming from the apps that they have already developed. Each sensor comes with their own algorithm to process the data, and we need to make sure that if we use the data, that is good quality. We need to understand how to interpret this data. We also can use this to understand patient-partner correlations. For example, if we use a PET sensor and we are looking at sleep, is the insomnia of a patient due to their partner's insomnia? That's a question that is not asked, and it's important. We can do lots of things with these sensors. Once we have this data, how can we now process the data from, for example, an accelerometer data to a signature? Here I'm showing real data that corresponds to different behaviors, from walking all the way to laying horizontally. We can use artificial intelligence to detect which sample corresponds to which behavior. So in red, these are samples from these accelerometers that correspond to a person walking. In blue, these are samples that correspond to a person lying horizontally. So we can clearly detect the different behaviors in this just using a simple accelerometer. Can we also look at other things? Can we pick up a gesture with this artificial intelligence and accelerometer? Can we pick up sleep apnea? Can we look at sleep disruption signatures? Can we look at substance impairment signature? So one important part of data analytics and artificial intelligence is the detection and identification of these different signatures. We can also use artificial intelligence to group patients according to their data. So the data could be not only coming from the sensors, but it could come from the clinicians, the diagnosis, the genomics data, the lab work that they have done. We can integrate all this data and understand how a population of patients look as compared with each other. So here you see it's a network. This is in silico data that was produced to check our tools and to validate our approach. In here, each of these points is a cluster with from 1 to a number of patients. Clusters that are similar to each other are joined, so sister clusters are joined by lines. In here you can see two big clusters, the top cluster and a smaller cluster at the bottom. So basically we have two big groups of patients. We can ask what's going on, why these two clusters are different. So I can color these by the outcome of a particular treatment. As soon as I color these, and I know what the treatment outcome was because the clinician added that data to the data set, we can see that in red, there are groups of patients that had good outcomes. In blue, we see some that had marginal improvement. And the cluster at the bottom that was separated, these are patients that actually either drop out or had no effect of the treatment. So now we can ask other questions. after we color by treatment, I can wonder why these patients in green actually drop out or have no effects. So I can say, well, what happened with other things that these patients may have about, like comorbidities? So, for example, I can ask who was depressed, who was unipolar, and who was bipolar. And I can see that the ones in red were actually not depressed and they had a good outcome. They actually responded to treatment. But those who were depressed and who were actually bipolar, they had no effect whatsoever or drop out of the study. So using this group approach, population approach, I can quickly home in on hypotheses that help me understand why a treatment had an effect or not, and how can I actually address this issue? How can I increase the efficacy of the treatment? Because now I know I have to address depression first before treatment can have an effect. So this is a general approach for group and population analysis, but we can also use it for individual analysis. This is real data. In blue, you have patients or groups of patients that have a motor disorder, and in red, you have controls. They have no motor disorder. So one looks at this network and one can wonder what's going on with these three groups in red. These are controls that actually look more similar to patients than to other controls. So as I home in, I see that actually these are three patients. These clusters actually are just an N of 1. I know they are controls, and actually I can pull the ID of this patient. And I can look at the data. I can look back at the real data of this person and say, why is this patient now, why this control looks like a patient? I may actually discover the early signs of disease. So we can go from population and group analysis very quickly to individual analysis. We can act and stop disease before it becomes severe, and we can tailor treatment to the individual as well. So the data analytics organizes, it helps with the diagnosis, it helps predict, it helps find. It integrates sensor, app, and patient data, finds patterns, answers specific questions. Who will respond to treatment? What predicts adverse events? Is the patient following instructions? Is the patient napping? Is it taking drugs? Is it time for a motivational nudge if you want the patient to do something in particular as part of a treatment? And which aspect of functioning is responding more to treatment? And which aspect predicts worse outcome and needs more attention? So you can see as data analytics can help improve care. So we are talking not only about improving care, improving diagnosis, but also improving monitoring of health, but also closing the loop, improving communication between the clinician and the patient. And with this, I hope that I can show you how we can move from a current model to a patient and person-centric model of care. And I thank my team. It's a large team. We also have very important partners, Cohen's Veterans Bioscience and my Helios for our insomnia and other projects. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Brunner, for that very informative and engaging webinar. Now, I would like to open it up for discussion, so please feel free to submit your questions to Dr. Brunner. And you can use the Q&A box to submit your questions. So here's one question from a participant. None of your methods or endpoint measures are FDA approved. What do you think is necessary to have sensor-based endpoints approved, and how would you go about it?
So this is very important when we go to clinical trials or when we want a particular treatment assessed and approved. We really need to work with FDA, and FDA is very cautious with reason. So we need to really provide a very strong proof of concept that the measures we get from the sensors and from the home devices really represent a very robust assessment of disease and disease recovery. So we can use existing indices or scales as a first pass and create surrogate measures that correlate very strongly with the FDA approved scales that are nowadays used in clinical trials. So it will require a lot of work and also work together with FDA, have a dialogue and move forward so we can use this technology in the clinic. Thank you for the question.
Any other questions? Another participant has asked the following question. Children with FXS or other NDDs often have hypersensitivity issues. People in LMI countries may have different ideas about wearing sensors, and veterans with PSD might feel their privacy is being invaded. What is your approach in dealing with these cultural, physical, and emotional sensitivities?
So it affects the fragile legs, red, a number of disorders in the autism spectrum disorder. They come with a lot of anxiety. You know, these kids have real social problems relating to other humans. They have problems with change. So they may actually have problems with new technology. So it's very important that before one designs and implements a solution, that we actually understand what's going on and talk to not only the clinicians that are taking care of this particular disorder, but also the caregivers. So in autism, for example, it will be fundamental to work with the family, make sure that they accept the technology, that they are happy, and they are very motivated to help their kids. But still, one could say, let's put a wearable device on this kid, and they may just reject it because it is too heavy, it is uncomfortable, it's a strange object on the skin. So every disease will require some work beforehand. We can design and implement a solution. In PTSD, for example, we need to make sure that there is no invasion of privacy, that we understand what patients, persons, caregivers, partners of persons who suffer are happy with the solutions. One of the things we are doing is we are implementing for PTSD and TBI a survey asking questions about apps. What are the apps? What they want in an app? What kind of services they want? What kind of sensors they want? What's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So our solutions will be based on the feedback we receive from patients.
All right, we have another participant who asks, why don't you design and use your own sensors, since all commercial available sensors were a priori not designed to be used in a clinical model?
So lots of people are doing that. We have many big corporations designing their own wearables. The sensors themselves are very cheap. So actually anybody can just buy a sensor with, of course, with some knowledge of the technology and build a sensor and build a wearable. However, the business model behind that is very different to what we want to do. We are a nonprofit. We are not in the business of selling anything. We don't want to maintain or to, take care of repairs. So it's a very different, it's a different idea. We want to also remain agnostic to the hardware, eventually having a list of approved and validated devices so we can have patients come with their own devices. We don't want to be pushing people to buy one sensor or the other. Actually, as a nonprofit, we cannot do that. So we would rather work with different vendors or different sensors. We want all sensors to be better. We want to have good sensors in the market, so we are happy to work with different devices and help them become better.
All right, we have one final question. I can't sleep, and where do I sign up for Circadi?
So in the slide I shown, there's a website that's up and running. So if you go to circadi.com, there's a website that will give a lot of information on what this is about and how to get in touch. Eventually, we want to have clinics and doctors to refer those patients who have insomnia so they can benefit from this system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brunner, and thank you to everyone for participating on the call. As I mentioned, this will be uploaded to YouTube and the Cohen Veterans Bioscience website.